Okay, Victoria, you just asked me if I would give you a few pointers as to how you could put the elements and principles of art in here. And so one of the things that I was looking at was in here how this building creates unity. So you can see in the front, let's see, I'm trying to write with my, oh, let's see, I'm just trying to write with my pen here. So in the front, you can see how this roof is, it goes like this, and this has the lines. And I think that in this building there's been some design on this that it's aesthetically appealing, because if you follow this line, it doesn't go up, it does cut off, but it is the same shape in there, creating a repetition of those patterns. This one, you know, the top one here is cut off in there, um, probably much like this one would be here. So perhaps you could talk about the use of lines and the use of the peak on the roof, and how that creates unity. You could talk about these windows and the repetition here on the windows with all of these small squares that were so typical of that time. And these were typically usually, each of these little window panes was a separate window. And you can talk about the design of the windows and probably using what materials they had, that this was a common design feature to have that repetition of the exact same size windows, the exact same size length, and the repeating pattern of the window frames in here. Nowadays, you'll see people doing this, but this will usually be one solid pane of glass, and then inside the glass, or maybe it'll be two or three panes of glass, and inside the glass, they put in these these lines on the inside to make it look like these olden windows. So I think that might be something worth mentioning, how, you know, this is the classic old style building and windows with the repeating pattern of those smaller panes in there that now people in modern day are trying to redo. So that talks a bit about the elements and principles of design up in on the roof. I mean, everything, of course, being, you know, square and rectangle. There are certainly no curves on this building. You did a great job in your descriptions of the building. And the same thing here on your high school. Um, Everything in here, you could talk about this building. Oh, sorry, I got to go back to my pen again. You could talk about this building being so perfectly symmetrical, right? Look at the balance. This is definitely that symmetric balance. If you cut this school in half, this half of the school is exactly the same as this half in the balance. And maybe you could presume why that might be on this, that they've used this symmetrical balance in the school. I have a feeling it was cost efficient to use it. So you might talk about that this has the symmetrical balance. And look at the materials that they've used in here. This, I'm not exactly sure what, I think I would assume this is metal in here, but maybe this is wood with these lines in here. But you can see the repetition of all of these. There's certainly the repetition of lines throughout this building that give it the unity, that create that unity in the building. So you can talk about that for your elements and principles of design. Why were most buildings made of brick? Was it a cheap material? Because you'll certainly have lots of repetition with the brick in there, and that kind of thing. So that should give you some idea for that one. Let's see, where else are we going? Oh, and with the church. Now, finally, you have a building here that's built a little bit more, rather your school probably was built for function, right? You needed to build a cheap school, but something that could function and last well. The churches, these were built certainly with aesthetically being to be aesthetically pleasing. And this is the first building you'll see in yours that actually has this curved design on the windows. That would have been something, of course, that would have cost, you know, more money to have that in there, but it was something that was aesthetically pleasing. So the design person who did this did that quite purposefully to have these rounded tops on there. And you can see how these windows differ from the very first slide in there. So you can still talk about repetition of pattern, but now you can talk about lines, being that they used many more curved lines in the church than they did in ones like, for example, the school or the building. As well, I think on this one as well, when you contrast it with the newer church building, most of these churches have this tall tower. And why would they have that? What would the design function of that be? You know, and you can talk about the design here. What's the emphasis of the church? What really stands out? And I think for most of these churches, they were trying to emphasize the cross on the top of the building. And they did that by making a very tall, pointed building with the cross on top. Interesting to note that most of the churches usually have this tall tower here in modern day, whether they use it for a bell tower now or not, but that was originally to house the bell tower, right? So you could talk about the use of the curved lines in here and contrast that with the functional buildings of the school, as well as the repetition. Still, this is still you've got the windows repeating with that exact same curve at the top, and also this is a very symmetrically balanced building. So I hope I'm giving you some good ideas as to how you can talk about this as well. And again, you can see this really tall tower here, which was still reminiscent of the old church that you took a picture of. But it has this really tall tower. Now, is this a bell tower? I don't know. I'm not sure what's in this church, but what would be the purpose of this really tall piece here? That's certainly the emphasis. Maybe it's simply there for emphasis, because I'm pretty sure on top of that tower is a cross. Even though it's not in your picture, I'm sure there's a cross on the top. So perhaps that's done. Where's the emphasis on here? Certainly there's an emphasis here. They've changed the color to red, and that's where they have their cross. So this is an emphasis. You can talk about that in there, as well as the emphasis of this taller tower with the cross on top. Aside from this tall tower, it's a symmetrical building, but certainly putting this off to the side and making it tall makes it asymmetrical. So that's still using all your elements and principles of design. Again, same thing. I won't go too much into detail here. This is similar to the church where they've got it's perfectly symmetrical, right? This would have been a very functional building using materials that were readily available, that were cheap. So it didn't have to cost the town a lot of money, but you've got a very symmetrical building here. And the building materials certainly weren't, it wasn't necessarily for aesthetic appeal as much as it was function. Although you can see that somebody did do some aesthetic appeal. They did obviously try to do something to make it aesthetically appealing by putting these two darker brown panels on either side. They could have just as easily, and it might have been cheaper, who knows, to have just put this entire light cream color, but somebody thought they wanted to make it look nice and stand out, so they put in these two side pieces for emphasis. So you can talk about the change of color, you can talk about the symmetrical balance, and you could talk about these vertical lines in there, how they used lines to create some unity or aesthetic appeal there. Same thing over here, you know, with the skating rink. Same exact thing here with your shop. You can see that this is very symmetrical, right? If you drew a line right in half, again, you have another symmetrical building. Well, why are people building buildings that are so symmetrical? Probably this isn't built by an artist, right? Somebody's not looking for that artistic value. They're looking for something that's functional and simple. The lines are clean lines. Everything is a straight up and down clean line. The windows, very straightforward. There's certainly none of those panes in them like you had in the old buildings that we looked at on your first picture. Very functional, very simple, very clean lines. And in here you can see, what was it, the rink we were talking about, where they changed the color and they had, you know, a bit of a stripe of dark brown on either side to create some emphasis. Well, look and see in this one, they couldn't have cared less whether for emphasis, it's all the same color all the way around. So those are some of the aesthetic things that you'll be looking, or the elements or principles of design that you could look for and comment. This one I find especially interesting. You'll find these, and these are more the older ones here, but why this one here, finally you have a building not made of straight lines. Probably still very reasonably priced to build. But look at what's happening here with the roundness. Why is this building round when every other building we saw, the skating rinks, the schools, had a very straight lined roof? So you could talk about the curved lines on this. Still a very symmetrical, but they're using curved lines in here. Let's see. What else do we have? Same thing on your elevator. You know, you can talk about, you know, it's certainly not artistically made, simply functional, you know, with the taller tower here, the elevator up on top. You could talk about repetition of lines, certainly with the wood coming across. You know, the paint being faded makes it look very rustic. So you could talk about their use of color. Why, when you see most greeneries, why are they mostly white? Was that white a cheap paint at the time? You know, what would the, I mean, you can talk about it as being the designer of the building. Why would they have designed it to be white? And what's the emphasis on the building? Let's see, does that take us to the end of yours? Oh, just about. We've got a couple more. I'll take you here to the new houses. This would be a great one here for you to compare or to talk about. These now are becoming aesthetically appealing, right? Like, why is this strip of brick right all across here? Certainly not for function. It is simply for aesthetic. So you'll notice in the newer houses, they're doing more things for aesthetic with different materials. You didn't have that before. Now you have a black roof. In your older ones, you certainly wouldn't have a black roof. So you can talk about the color changes or the tones. You can look in here and talk about the windows and see where's the repetition that's going on in here. And look at these panes of windows, just like the old church that you saw. Just like the old church that you saw that actually had separate panes, this would just be a modern day version where they've taken the windows, probably 2 panes of windows, and put some metal framing inside to make it look like those olden day windows. So it's funny how everything, you know, old now becomes new again, right? And this particular house here versus this house is not symmetrical, right? They've got a jet out over here. The garage is on this side. So now somebody's thinking a little bit more about aesthetic design rather than just building a boxy house. This one here, somebody's built this one, but this one is a very symmetrical house, very different than this one. So you might compare and contrast the two. Yes, they have the same colors, the dark roofs, still beige colors, which creates unity in the whole environment. But they're 2 very different houses where this one has a lot more detail and a lot more detail in this one with extra features, whereas this one is just very flat on the top and put up very clean, very functional, and this one with a lot more attention to detail. So I hope that helps you be able to put in some elements and principles of design into your picture. Let me know if you have any other questions or concerns.